In this lecture, we will explain the order of execution. Did you ever wonder what happens in the background when you click on the Save button? What operations run and in what order? Do validation rules come before or after assignment rules? When does a before save flow run? Is it after a trigger or before it? What if I have a process, a trigger, and a flow on the same object at the same time? In what order are these executed? Well, in Salesforce, there is an order in which events execute whenever a record is saved. This is called the order of execution. In other words, the order of execution is a set of rules that describe the path a record takes through all automations and the events that happen from save when you hit the save button to the commit. Let's take a look at the different order of execution steps and events. Step 1 is initiating the record. This means loading the original record from the database if you are editing a record, or initializing a new record from the database if it is an insert. So you have to keep in mind that this is all happening after you click on the Save button. So step 1 is the first step that takes place after the Save button. Step 2 is system validation. This includes things like verifying that all required fields are populated, the entered value has the right format, the maximum field length is not exceeded, and so on. Step 3 is executing before save flows, which are record triggered flows that are configured to run before the record is saved. There is a new feature in Flow that allows you to specify if you want to execute the record triggered flow before or after save. If before save is selected, this is when it gets executed. Step 4 is executing Apex before triggers. This is similar to the before save flow, but it executes the logic of a before trigger. So we are using Apex code to build a before trigger, and whatever is in the before trigger will get executed in this step. Generally speaking, a before trigger has logic that is used to modify the record itself and not related records. Step 5 is running the system validation rules again. This is because the field values could have been changed by the before flow or by the before trigger, and this step also runs any user-defined validation rules. These are the rules created by objects in setup. Step 6 is running duplicate rules if you have them enabled. If so, they will run their check here. If a blocking rule is encountered, then the process will stop. Step 7 is saving the record, but not committing it to the database, and getting a record ID, which is the primary ID of the record. This step also generates the created date and created by ID fields, the last modified date and last modified by ID fields, and the system mode stamp field. Again, this step will only save the record and it will get the ID, but the record is never committed to the database in this step. Step 8 is executing after triggers. Just like the before Apex triggers, this is Apex code written by a developer, and generally speaking, the after trigger is used when you need to update a record or object other than the one currently being saved. If we are editing, then the after update trigger would run, and if we are inserting, then it will be the after insert trigger. Step 9 is running the assignment rules, which can exist on the lead and case objects. If they have been defined, they would set the record owner during this step. Step 10 is auto response rule. Step 11 is executing the workflow rules. This is the original old automation tool that existed before processes and flows. If you are still using them, then this is the step when they run. Step 12 is running the processes and the auto launch flows called by the processes, if any. The processes would run first, then any auto launch flow would run later. Step 13 and 14 is running the escalation rules and the entitlement rules. Escalations and entitlements are features of the case object. Escalation rules will run first, then entitlement rules will follow. Step 15 is executing after save flows, which are record triggered flows that are configured to run after the record is saved. Step 16 is if you have any rollup summary fields on the parent record of the record being saved, those will calculate and update in this step. This will cause the parent record to run through the full order of execution as well. Also, the same is applicable on the rollup summary feeds of the grandparent record if they exist. Step 17 is evaluating criteria-based sharing. Step 18 is committing all DML operations to the database. This includes the record itself and any other records that were created or modified during the execution. So, if let's say in this execution you are calling other records, you are saving other records, none of these will get committed until this step. And finally, the last step is any post-commit logic, such as sending emails and so on. This is the same, but in a graphical format that you can print and review offline. As we can see here, we have 6 events before saving the record and getting the ID, and then we have many more events that happen after saving the record and getting the ID. Again, saving and getting the ID does not mean that the record is committed to the database, as failures may happen during these execution steps. For that, the record gets committed on the commit DML operations to database, which is at the end. Anything before saving and getting the ID is considered before save. This is where we have automation operations like before save flows and before triggers. And anything that happen after saving the record and getting the ID is considered after save. This is where we have automation operations like after trigger, workflow rules, processes, and flows called by processes, which are auto launch flows, and after save record triggered flows. Now let's explain what would happen if any step in this execution order would update or create another record. To do so, I will give each step an abbreviation. So the initiate record step would be IN, system validation would be VS, before save flow would be BF, and so on. Now I will remove the full name of each step and keep the abbreviations. And then I will place the abbreviations that represent each step at the bottom. On the after trigger step, and if this after trigger modifies or creates other records, the whole order of execution steps would run for this other record. So as you can see here, we have an arrow from the original after trigger step that initiates another order of execution set of steps. Note that the commit and post-commit steps do not run for this record until after the initial record commits and after commit steps run. So basically we have a set of steps as you can see in the bottom. So let's say you are saving a record, so the bottom will represent the order of execution for this specific record. And let's say that during this save, this after trigger did create another record, so this will initiate another total set of execution for this other record. So in this case we will have 2 different set of order of executions, one for the initial record, and then we'll have another one called by the apex. Now, if the workflow rule step produces a field update in the record, then it will initiate these 4 steps. The first step that is initiated is the before update trigger. Then we have the system validation rules. Then we have the save operation. And finally, we have the after update trigger. So basically, at the bottom, we have the initial set of order of execution. Let's say that the workflow step did produce a field update. In this case, only these 4 steps would run. Going forward, if the process updates a field in the same record, then most of the order of execution steps run from before trigger to processes and auto launch flow. So let's say that at the bottom we have the initial record that started this execution. On the process step, this updated a field on the same record. What would happen in this case? In this case, we rerun the before trigger up to the process step. So all of these steps would run again. On the same step, and if the process or auto launch flow updates a field in a different record or create a brand new record, then the whole order of execution steps would run for this new or updated record. And as we have seen earlier, the commit and post commit do not run for this record until after the initial record commit and after commit steps run. On the rollup summary field update step, and if the parent record contains rollup summary fields that are updated, then the same thing will happen. The whole order of execution steps would run for this parent record, and as we have seen, commit and post commit do not run for this parent record until after the initial record commit and after commit steps run. So let's say that the record that initiated all of this has a master detail relationship to another object, and this master detail relationship object has a rollup summary field. In this case, and in the case that this rollup summary field is updated, the whole execution steps would run for this parent record, starting from initializing the record, and finally the commit and the post commit will not run, and as we mentioned, these will run at the end of the initial record commit and post commit. Now, if the parent record is updated and a grandparent record contains a rollup summary field, then also the whole order of execution steps would run for this grandparent record. And again, commit and post commit do not run for this grandparent record until after the initial record commit and post commit steps run. So basically we have the initial record downstairs, and then once we came to the rollup summary field step, this record has a master detail relationship, and let's say that the parent record had some rollup summary fields. Now let's say that this parent record also has another master detail to another object on the top. So basically the initial record will initiate this on the parent, and then the parent again, once it reaches the rollup summary field, and if it has another object as a master detail which also has rollup summary field, then this will also initiate a brand new order of execution for this grandparent. Note that there are much more complex scenarios where loops might happen. For example, a process might update a field on the record which would force both before and after triggers to run, among other things. This rerun can also change something which might cause another run, and so on. For that, I have added a reference to a Dreamforce session that tackles this advanced issue. And finally, again, this is the whole list of the order of execution steps and events. Please make sure that you fully understand it, that you fully get the meaning of each step. It is used every time a record is saved, so understanding this order is critical. You can also print this out and review it whenever you want. And finally, as usual, thanks for watching.